So welcome everyone. This is the second presentation from our Green Energy series, which is a series of talks organized and created by Solar Oregon's very awesome volunteers. Carrie Booth, Denise Roy, Linda Barnes, Mark and Edward Louie, who will be giving the talk today. And today's topic is on solar and storage, and we'll be diving into the concept of grid parity, which Edward will explain in this presentation. And these talks are on the first Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. So if you like this talk, keep an eye out. And for the next one, it will be on our newsletter and our Eventbrite. And we hope to see you there. So first, a bit of background. So I'm Grace Hardy. I'm a program manager at Solar Oregon. We are a local nonprofit focused on expanding solar in Oregon through education, outreach, community, and advocacy. So we do regular How to Go Solar webinars. We also have a number of solar tours throughout the year, including our tour of zero energy homes throughout Portland and our solar winery tour. We also organize solarized campaigns, which are campaigns to get whole neighborhoods to go solar together. And we like to focus on peer-to-peer education and sharing solar stories. We are a member-based nonprofit, and so I'd like to give a big thank you to everyone who is a member. And if you aren't a member and are interested, you can become a member today by clicking or typing in this link. You also can follow us on social media and Eventbrite at Solar Oregon to keep up to date with all of our events and webinars that we have throughout the year. During this presentation, we encourage you to put all of your questions in the Q&A box. This can be found at the bar in the bottom of your screen. It's a little icon with two chat bubbles, and that just allows us to have all the questions in one location. And then you can use the chat to communicate with other attendees or hosts or panelists, but put all of your questions in the Q&A box. Before we get started, I'm going to launch two quick surveys, and these just help us get to know who's with us today so we can learn who we're reaching with these surveys. And yeah, so I'm launching those. I'll give you some time to fill that out. We have a few more seconds on that one. Awesome. And then we have one more before we get started. Okay, a few more seconds. Great. Thank you all for doing that. So as I mentioned, our speaker today is Edward Louie. Edward is passionate about residential energy efficiency technologies, building assemblies, and housing typologies. Edward works as a building energy efficiency research engineer at Pacific Northwest Natural Laboratory in the Building Systems and Technology Integration Group. He works on research projects related to heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, high performance windows, and remote quality assurance via contractors taking photos of critical details and reporting test results. Before joining PNNL, he worked as a residential rater verifier / inspector for 3 above code energy efficiency programs in the greater Portland and Southwest Washington area. And outside of work, Edward has been working on building a super energy efficient off-grid all-electric tiny house on a trailer to gain firsthand construction skills and experiences with building and executing high-performance envelopes, installing solar PV and batteries, and more. When complete, Edward will live in the tiny house to test whether it is possible to live off-grid with the designed energy systems, and use it also as a job site trailer to oversee the construction of middle-density housing projects. So we're very excited to have Edward here presenting with us, and I will hand it off to you.
Okay. Do you want me to drive the slides from here on forward?
I'm happy to continue with the slides, unless it's easy for you to switch screens.
No, it's not that. I just don't have screen sharing capabilities.
Okay,
So,
I'll stay on the screen clicking.
Okay,
just let me know.
because it still says host disabled screen sharing. But anyways, you can drive the slides. So yes, thank you everybody for waking up at a reasonably early time on Saturday to attend this presentation. Okay, let's dive right in. Next slide. All right. First of all, I have to say this, but this presentation, I've done my best effort to convey the information in the slides accurately, but they don't necessarily reflect the views of my employer, Pacific Northwest National Lab, Department of Energy, or Solar Oregon. So just letting everybody know that. Next slide. All right, so here's kind of the outline of the slides that we're going to talk about. Solar plus storage. We're going to talk about, the realities of solar and how it's unevenly available across the year, and therefore why storage is important, and batteries being a big component of it, and how this uneven availability of solar could likely in the future residential solar change net metering policies. And then later in the latter half of the presentation, we'll actually dive into look at some of the hardware it takes to actually implement a really intelligent solar system that plays well with the grid and can manage energy daytime, nighttime, and understand solar potential not only today but in the future as well. Okay, next slide. So I like to say solar availability is kind of like the availability of fresh produce in Oregon. It's very uneven. It's not as bad as Oregon cherries, though, because if you want Oregon cherries outside the Oregon cherry season, good luck getting them. So at least solar is a little bit better than that. But the availability of solar being uneven across the year drives everything in terms of the value of solar and how you really should size solar systems in order to accommodate this uneven availability. Next slide. And so here's a slide showing a shape for Chicago, which is slightly even worse than Oregon. They have even less sun in the wintertime, so their shape is a little bit peakier. But Oregon is very similar too. We get plenty of sun in May, June, July, August, but then January, December, it's pretty bad. So that's why batteries are really important. So even in days when it is very sunny, without batteries, as soon as the sun goes down, then you don't get any solar energy production. And so a non-battery solar system will use the grid as a battery. And that's fine for now because we have a very small percentage of the population in Oregon and in pretty much every state that have rooftop solar. But as more and more people get solar, it becomes less of a good idea to use the grid as a battery. It's just not very fair, and I will get into that. And so batteries provide the necessary buffer to get through the night, also provides the necessary buffer to get through cloudy days. And so, and then also in the peak day, when you have tons of solar energy, but you're really not using that much energy to be able to instantaneously use that energy during the peak day, you can store it in these batteries, and so then that helps level out, the availability of solar, so that you can use it throughout the 24-hour period. Next slide. And so here's another picture showing how solar really kind of dovetails into the grid. So as you can see, during the daytime hours and in the summer months, you get a lot more solar availability. And this graph is of the grid and how carbon intensive the grid is. And so between residential solar, commercial solar, utility solar, it really peaks out during those summer months, and also during the kind of the noon hours of the day. And so that really pushes out the need for carbon-based generating resources during those hours. But then because we're not even projecting that by 2030 we're going to get that much storage on the grid, then in the evening hours, then once again we need to turn back over to fossil-based generating resources to provide energy during the evening hours. And I think that this is a fair prediction for 2030, but I think if more people knew about just how great solar plus storage is already today, which we'll dive into in subsequent slides, we can do probably better than this graph. Next slide. And so right now already, a lot of states that are really sunny or have already transitioned something other than retail rate net metering. And so what that means is currently in Oregon and Washington, pretty much all those orange states, what you're allowed to do is retail net metering. And what that means is that when you send a kilowatt hour of solar energy that you produce on your roof back out to the grid, the electric utility will compensate you at retail rate for that kilowatt hour you send back out. Even if you send it out at like noon on a summer day when there's plenty of solar available on the grid already and not a lot of demand. And so as a result, then the utility is forced to figure out, okay, well, what can we turn off on the grid in order to accommodate all this solar? And so that's the problem. When you have a lot of solar that's not controlled with loads, is that you end up having to turn off a lot of stuff in order to maintain the balance between generation and consumption on the grid. And California is one state that they have just a lot of solar, and so they are transitioning to something other than retail net metering in order to try to incentivize people to sell power back to the grid in a more controlled fashion. But luckily for folks that have rooftop solar, you don't have batteries on your solar system, currently there is no rumors in Oregon or Washington that we're going to transition to anything other than retail net metering anytime soon. But in the next subsequent slides, I'm just going to explain how well, if we have 30% or 50% of people that have rooftop solar, how that will eventually change. Okay, next slide. And so so I looked up the data to see approximately what our population has solar installations, and Oregon's about 0.5%. So that, like I said, that's why the electric utilities are not yet very concerned about having to manage all the customers sending power to the grid on a sunny afternoon day in the summer, because when you have less than 1% of the customers doing that, it really doesn't affect the overall load shape and your operation of the grid that much. Washington, 0.3 again, not much. But how do you operate as an electric utility? How do you operate a grid if you have 30 or 50% of your population having rooftop solar? You certainly can't operate in the same way as you are right now. Next slide. And so one of the common ways that electric utilities address rooftop solar if they're not going to do retail net metering is that they will value the solar that you generate on your roof at some value less than retail rates. Oftentimes that value is wholesale generation rate, which is literally the avoided cost. Like, so this will be what the electric utility has to pay themselves in terms of fuel cost in order to generate that kilowatt hour if they were to do it themselves. And so that's what a concept called wholesale generation cost. And it's below retail rate because retail rate includes generation, taxes, some profit, distribution, transmission, and all that jazz. And so, since when you send a kilowatt hour out to the grid, you're not covering those costs either. You're just literally sending a kilowatt hour, then that's what they'll pay you for. And so in this scenario, we're showing that like in Oregon, the wholesale generation rate that you'll get compensated for somewhere around 3 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. But there are states that don't even want to compensate their customers for wholesale generation costs. There are scenarios in the US where you could compensate $0 per kilowatt hour, in which case then the value of solar is excellent, because if you don't store it, you don't get compensated at all for it. And so in Oregon and Washington, we're not there yet, but what if we end up with this situation? Then the value of solar will certainly increase. But even right now, with retail rate net metering, having batteries as part of your solar system, you end up with a resiliency to the power outage, and that's a very good thing. So currently, there are some reasons to do it, even with retail net metering. Next slide. And so right now, if you wanted to, Oregon does allow you to, instead of doing net metering, you could sign up your solar system as a small qualifying facility. And that is where then they will write you a check for the wholesale generation value of the solar energy that you send off to the grid. And so, like as I shown in the previous slide, and it's also in this table, it is somewhere around 3 to 7 cents. So it's nowhere close to retail rate. But there are some reasons perhaps that you might want to do this, even though you're not getting retail rate compensation for this energy you sell back to the grid, which is that net metering, the electric utility will not write you a check for excess generation at the end of the net metering year. In the Pacific, I believe Pacific Power does it too, but I know for sure Portland General Electric, what they'll do is that they'll take the value of your excess kilowatt hours and put it towards a fund for low-income weatherization and electric bill assistance and stuff like that, but it doesn't come back to your pockets. And so therefore, you can't make money off of retail net metering. And also, you can't cover the monthly basic charge, even if you were to, for example, in the summer months, generate tons of excess kilowatt hour credits, you still have to pay your $11 basic monthly charge. But with this small qualifying facility path, what you can do is you can have a solar system that's oversized and generate a lot of kilowatt hours in the summertime. And those, even though if it's valued at 3 to 7 cents a kilowatt hour, you'll get a check for that. And so then that check is big enough to be able to cover the $11 monthly basic charge, which you wouldn't be able to do with retail net metering. So that's something to think about. And I have an example later showing that, how that this still pencils out, and it's pencils out quite good. So, in my line of work, I have heard a lot of people being very concerned that, if the electric utilities transition away from retail rate net metering, then the number of people that are interested in solar will decrease dramatically, and then we won't be meeting our climate change goals and so on and so forth. And I've been trying to tell people, hey, don't worry, okay? Like even if we don't have retail net metering, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be actually a good thing. So yeah, next slide. And so the other option is to go off the grid. So if you don't want to deal with the $11 a month basic charge, you can just not be connected to the grid, and then therefore, without an account with Portland General Electric or Pacific Power, then they won't be able to bill you for $11 a month. But is going off the grid necessarily a good thing? And I think that for many reasons, it's not a good thing, because you literally have no one to sell to if you have excess generation. And so therefore, you will have to be very diligent in the summertime to figure out ways to store or make some sort of useful application for all those excess kilowatt hours you generate during the summertime. And then in the wintertime, during the darkest parts of the wintertime, you will need to figure out how to generate the deficit kilowatt hours when you have, like, let's say like 4 days of cloudy weather, and your battery is only sized for, let's say, like 2 days of power. What are you doing the other 2 days? Well, I mean, luckily we have the technology now of vehicle to home and vehicle to grid, and that technology is ramping up pretty quick. Like Mitsubishi, their Outlander car is already vehicle to home ready. And so then, like, you don't have to like have a stranded resource that you only use like a handful of days a year, which is like a backup generator. If you're off the grid for those like 5 or 7 days out of the year when it's super cloudy to the point that you run out of battery and run out of solar. So it is nice that there's that option. You know, it's not a stranded resource because you drive your car the rest of the time, and then it provides the energy for those 5 to 7 super consecutive cloudy days. So I mean, it is more viable than before, and it's the cost of going off the grid is more is less than before. But I don't think it's nearly as good of a option as signing up as a qualifying facility. Next slide. And so, indeed, if you have a situation where you have tons of excess generation in the summer, and you're not able to sell to the grid at a good rate, well, what can you do with it? Well, I've got ideas, and I'm sure you got ideas if you have virtually free energy to use up. And so here's some of my ideas: is that you charge your plug-in hybrid or electric vehicle, and so then you get you value that excess generation at either the avoided cost of gasoline, or you value it at retail rates for the kilowatt hour. You can also even sell it to your neighbors. If you have tell your neighbor to come to your driveway and charge, and put a little meter on that charger and charge them 1 or 2 cents below the electric company's rates, and maybe you can do that. And then another interesting thing is the world, as it gets warmer, more and more people are opting for air conditioning. And there's this great body of literature that is very concerned about air conditioning in the summertime, melting the grid and causing strain on the grid, and being a major problem to deal with in the years and decades ahead. And that would be true if we didn't have rooftop solar. But if you have rooftop solar and it's sized properly or even oversized, you can, in the summertime, basically run your AC as much as you want. It'd be amazingly comfortable. And it's the winter time that you have to worry about. It's not the summer. You get tons of energy. You don't know what to do with in the summertime. And then also canning and freezing vegetables and fruits that are available only during that growing period. Like if I want to enjoy Oregon's cherries, I'm gonna have to freeze or can them. Otherwise, there is no Oregon cherries the rest of the year. And then next slide. And then here's a pretty new concept, and at the Pacific Northwest National Lab, I'm leading a research project to try to really understand more about like the viability of this concept, which is that so in Portland and a lot of kind of wetter climates, if you were to do new construction, they require you to have a plan to handle and manage the on-site stormwater or rainwater. Oftentimes this is done with like, gutters that then run into kick out deflectors, and you're just essentially pouring the rainwater from your roof onto your lawn, or you have dry wells that are on your property to manage that rainwater. But if that's already a requirement that you have to manage on-site rainwater and stormwater, could you manage it instead of having it just like go into the dirt and disappear? Could you put it in a tank that actually stores the rainwater, and then put a heat exchanger, which is in the form of like a PEX slinky, into this tank? And this tank, in order to handle the amount of rain we get in Portland, you need a tank that's not a few hundred gallons. You need a tank that's like thousands of gallons. And so it's a pretty sizable tank that in order to manage even the winter rainy season. And so could you use this system for not only like, offsetting your water usage in the summertime, but also could you use that heat exchanger so that during the summertime, you're rejecting air conditioning heat to this tank of water and warming it up. And since it's underground, then it's, insulated by the dirt. And so then like, could you then pull that heat back out of this, several thousand-gallon water tank in the wintertime and use that to make it easier to heat your home in the wintertime? And so if you have excess solar generation in the summertime, then, in addition to running your air conditioner, you can, run your air conditioner to in heat pump mode and heat this water. So we're not really sure about the feasibility and, and all that, but it's a concept, and we're working on doing the research. Next slide. And so one of the key factors to solar plus battery storage is to find batteries that are low enough cost to make it worth the while to do it. I mean, batteries used to be fantastically expensive, and a lot of people still think batteries are fantastically expensive, but that's not really true. Batteries have come down a lot in cost, similar to how solar panels have come down in cost. And so now there are lots of really affordable batteries that are not off-label to the point that they're not UL certified, and therefore you can't use it in a actual like solar system that is permitted and safe for your home. Like a lot of these low-cost batteries that are coming on the market, they do go through all the UL certifications so that you can install them in your home. And these newcomers to the playing field, they're able to deliver you batteries that are just as reliable and long-lasting as some of the big name players like Tesla Powerwall at a third of the cost. And so that's really cool. And the other thing that's really cool is that the Inflation Reduction Act that's will soon be available to everybody. That 30% tax credit for solar and applies to batteries as well. Oregon also has rebates for solar plus batteries, but those rebates, if you want to take advantage of those rebates for the battery portion, you have to buy the batteries with the solar at the same time. So that's something to note, whereas the Inflation Reduction Act, you can do it in separate purchases if you wanted to. Next slide. And so another innovation in besides the batteries coming down in price is, I mentioned that solar panels have come down in price, and now you can get high performance solar panels that have over 20% efficiencies at the price of 57 cents a watt, and that it will still be producing those watts for 25 years, because these panels, most of them have 25-year warranties. So that's really cool. Technologies like PERC and bifacial panels, when they first came to market, these technologies had a price premium to the technology. Nowadays, these PERC and bifacial technologies and panels adds pretty much zero cost to the panels, and so that's really cool. And then another major innovation in the solar panel world is larger and larger panels. And so before, a few years ago, 300-ish watt panels were the norm, and now 400-ish watts and even up to 450 watt panels are very commonplace. And the nice thing about these larger panels is that you can fill your roof with fewer panels, and that means you have less trips up and down for the installer, and so you save on labor, you save on the number of nuts and bolts you need to put the system together. And so, there's a lot of on the install side savings with installing these larger panels. So that's really cool. Next slide. And so here's an example system. I took the average kilowatt hours used in a year for an average Oregonian, and then spread that out to the year based on, I did this. I weighted the 10,644 kilowatt hours to the shape of the load curve of my house. And I have an all-electric house that has a ductless heat pump as the main heat source. We have a heat pump water heater, heat pump dryer, electric stove, and all that. And so as you can see, that total usage for 10,644, most of it is in the winter because you're running electric heating in the form of a ductless heat pump. And so we are a heating dominant climate, and so it makes sense that the majority of those kilowatt hours are used in the winter time. But the problem is that if you install a solar system, you don't get your generation in the winter time. You get it dominantly in the summertime, as you can see in the second column there, total kilowatts generated. And so this is a system that when I designed this, I designed it so that it's oversized, so that it roughly net zeros the winter 6 months of usage. And so therefore in the summertime it produces a lot of excess generation. And so in this scenario, I valued that excess generation at wholesale generation rates. And so even at 7 cents a kilowatt hour, the 10,969 kilowatt hours of summer excess generation, they've sold at 7 cents a kilowatt hour with net $767. And then in the winter time, there's still, even though I oversized the system so that it net zeros in the winter 6 months, there's still the darkest December, January, and a little bit of February, a little bit of November also, where even this oversized solar system is not enough to keep up with the house's energy usage. And so, we have to buy a few kilowatt hours that will end up costing $231. And then the $132 is that is all those monthly basic charges. And so if you subtract out all those costs, you still end up with a $400 check in your mail at the end of this scenario year with signing up this system as a qualifying facility. So that's why earlier when I pre-shadowed that, hey, even if we have a scenario where you're not net metering at retail rates, if you're only getting paid wholesale generation rates for your solar, will that still pencil out? And here I'm showing yes, you're more than able to offset any amount of electricity you buy at retail rate. You're able to offset the monthly basic charges and still be able to come out with some money on top. And a simple payback period in the system after the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits and Oregon rebates comes out to a payback period of less than 10 years, and that's even well within the lifetime of the batteries. And so that's really cool. Next slide. Another concept that is kicked around in the world of energy is to value energy based on a concept called levelized cost of energy. And what this metric does is that you put all your costs in terms of capital and operating costs up in a numerator, and then you figure out how much energy that this generating technology or this thing that generates energy will generate over its design life period in the denominator. And then you add all that stuff up and do the division, and then you end up with some dollar per kilowatt hour or dollar per megawatt hour. And that helps you compare different technologies in terms of how much it costs to generate energy. It's a little bit problematic because, you could do this LCOE calculation without accounting for batteries, and then therefore you don't account for like, when the energy is generated. It doesn't match when you actually want the energy. Like for example, like if you generate in the summertime, are you able to make use of it when really all the demand is in the winter? So it's a slightly flawed for renewables. But if you were to run the math, it works out to 5.4 cents for this example system that I came up with in the previous slide. And this $9,400 even accounts for replacing the batteries. And so, the batteries are warranted for 7,000 cycles, which it works out if you cycle it once a year to like 19 years. But let's be conservative and say like, that you have to replace them at the midway point of the panels, at the midway point of the 25-year warranty of the panels. And so throwing that in there as a cost, you're still well below the 14 cents per kilowatt hour that the electric company charges you for energy as a residential consumer. And so, I mean, with this kind of calculation, we are well into or beyond grid parity. And grid parity is a concept where the cost of you generating energy is equal to the cost of buying that energy from the electric utility. And so that when those two numbers are equal, then finally you've reached grid parity. And then if you're able to generate that energy and use it and store it and stuff like that at a cost below electric utility is charging you, then you're beyond grid parity. So, I mean, I think that Oregon in this scenario is beyond grid parity by a lot already. And so even if you were to, change some of the numbers around, like maybe add higher labor costs or higher permit costs or whatever, that, in the end, you're going to find a number that's still below 14 cents because you got a lot of room to work with. Next slide. And so that kind of concept of levelized cost of energy, the utility constantly tracks these things. And this is a National Renewable Energy Lab graph, and they've shown that solar is in the whatever $40-45 dollars per megawatt hour. So that's cheaper than the previous slide, which was like I came up with whatever 5. If you convert the kilowatt hour to megawatt, it'll be $54 a megawatt hour for this rooftop solar. So rooftop solar is still more expensive than utility scale solar, but the utility scale technology doesn't necessarily have the battery storage element roll into it. And so once you roll in the battery storage element and maybe the cost of land and transmission and stuff, maybe it's not quite that low. But anyways, I want to try to make a claim that like when you consider the cost of land and the cost of transmission and storage, perhaps if you got a good roof, which we'll talk about more, like how do we make roofs really friendly for solar, but if you got a good roof, you can potentially do solar on your roof at a price pretty competitive to utility scale solar. Next slide. And so yeah, on the topic of roofs, how do we have roofs that are really friendly for solar? I think that having monoslope or monopitch, or they're also called shed roofs, that's a really good way to design roofs. Short of a monoslope roof, gable roofs will be a next best thing. If you can have the roofs be white color, that helps with being able to make the most use of your bifacial solar panels, the bifacial gain, because how bifacial solar panels work is that they generate electricity with the solar energy going through the panel, and then you actually get some bonus energy with the light energy bouncing off of the reflective surface on the backside of the solar panel, and then with the light energy coming back with the reverse return trip. And so if you have a white roof, then you get a lot of light bounce, and so that makes the most use of your bifacial gains if you have a bifacial panel. Standing seam metal roof is another, it's a great roof, probably the best roof you can get for putting solar on your roof, because you can actually just clip the solar panels to the standing seams, and so that reduces your racking cost. And then in your house, it'll be great to have more space allocated around the electric panel to allow for batteries to be placed, to have a space for the battery in the design of these homes. And then the future of having these systems, they really should be a little bit more intelligent. The inverters and the solar control stuff needs to be more intelligent to understand price signals, and be able to understand whether it's going to be cloudy or sunny the next day. And we'll get into all that stuff a little bit more in the future. But here I just wanted to share with you a picture of a great roof design, and as an example. And then below is in the corner is a picture of a inverter / rack system like that. That's what it'll look like if you had a system like I'm describing, with batteries and inverters near the electric panel. You need to make space for that stuff. And then if you do go off grid, now there are bidirectional vehicle to home interactive chargers that are actually for sale, available to buy on the market already. Those just came available to market for purchase probably in the last 6 months. And so that's really cool. If you have a compatible vehicle, Nissan Leaf is another common vehicle that is, if you have a CHAdeMO plug, a Nissan Leaf with a CHAdeMO plug, there are also a range of chargers that are bidirectional to do vehicle to home interactivity if you have one of those cars. Next slide. And so if we're talking batteries, then a very logical question to ask is, okay, well, how many kilowatt hours of battery storage do I need? And that really depends on your objective. You can either size it small enough just to provide for a power outage, or size it large enough to cover multiple days of energy usage if you're going to go off grid. And there's not really a right answer. That's a decision you have to make. And for sure, if you use electricity for space heating and hot water, then you want to size the battery for the winter kind of period. So at least maybe the winter 6 months. And so that's something to think about. Next slide. And so here's, I took the month of November of my all electric home energy usage, and looked at, okay, well, how many kilowatt hours per day do I use in November? November is already in the winter, so it's 34 kilowatt hours per day. And so then that is maybe a number I can use to size my battery if I were to put batteries on the main house. And as you see in the pie chart, even though with a very efficient ductless heat pump, if the home I'm living in is the main house is not passive. I'm building a passive house, tiny house, but the main house is nowhere close to being passive house. I've made some efforts to make it energy efficient in terms of air sealing and insulation, but it's still sort of an energy pig. And so 46% of the energy with that is to run the ductless mini split to keep the house warm. So when you have electric heating, even with heat pumps, you need to size your batteries and be mindful of that in the wintertime. Next slide. And so 34 kilowatt hours. Okay, well, if you're going to use this example battery, then we need 7 of them, and that comes up to a little bit about 10 grand. But oh wow, 10 grand is kind of expensive for batteries. Well, this is storage for 19 years. It's the manufacturer has a design life of 7,000 cycles. If you cycle it once per year, it's 19 years. So by the time you actually look at the actual cost of the storage for the service life of 19 years, it's pennies. So next slide. And so I alluded to the idea that we need smarter inverters, and indeed, so when you have batteries, then inverters need to be smarter, because then the inverter, you need to make decisions like, okay, well, do I focus on charging the battery or serving the needs of the loads inside the house? And so smart inverters can make decisions like that. They can also make decisions on whether to sell the excess generation to the grid, or to really charge up the battery fully, because it's able to predict that, tomorrow it's going to be super cloudy. And so then you actually want to charge your battery all the way up, versus make the decision of, sell as much of the energy to the grid as possible, because then tomorrow is going to be extremely sunny. And so if we don't sell a lot of power back to the grid, then there will be no space in the battery, like it's already full. You want to, if it's sunny, very sunny next day, then you want to actually sell some of that, even the energy in the battery, to the grid, so that it's low enough that the next day you have space to put the excess kilowatt hours from the sun. So there are now inverters available. Like this is an SMA makes inverters that can do forecasting and take forecast into account. And then next slide, we have another example of a smart inverter. Or maybe we don't have the slide, but anyways, I thought I had a slide of another inverter. But anyways, permitting cost. There has been some people kicking around that, permitting cost is a impediment. It may be in some states, but luckily in Portland, Oregon, the Bureau of Development Services has been quite nice to us with very modest and low permitting costs for solar. Here are some of the example costs for the permits for the 3.5 and a 5.5 kilowatt system. And then they have different fees for engineered systems versus prescription systems. If you have a somewhat modern house that has trusses in the roof, you should be able to use the prescriptive path. So yeah, that's the story of that. Next slide. And so another thing that is increasingly problematic is actually really the labor cost of solar, because there's just not enough people in the trades. It's not just the solar trade, it's all construction trades. And so if the labor costs continue to kind of increase, one way to kind of control that labor cost to keep that from ballooning is, again, making the roof very solar friendly, the larger panels saving labor cost, and then also advances in the equipment of solar. As you see in the lower right-hand corner, now like there's abundant, a growing number of inverters that are just plug and play. And so hopefully as more inverters get there, then maybe there will be a policy shift that, hey, like, you're not actually having to wire any bare wires into terminals that are potentially dangerous. These MC4 connectors are like, plugging Christmas lights together, and, they're perfectly safe. And so maybe as this technology continues to move forward, regulatory policy will catch up and allow people without electrical licenses to do more of the solar work, and the electrician will maybe just be there to check things. Next slide. And so if you look at the cost of solar right now, it's not in the hardware cost. The hardware cost keeps decreasing day by day, but the soft cost continues to represent a major cost of solar. Grace, at the earlier beginning of the presentation, mentioned about like, neighborhood level, solar installations to install, solar on like every home in a neighborhood. Those types of efforts really do save a lot of money, because then you're reducing like sales and marketing costs, overhead, you're doing everything all at the same time. And so those are some solutions. And same thing if like new construction in subdivisions, if we're to have solar in every single home in the subdivision, rather than leaving that as an option for homeowners to do individually, you end up being able to install solar at a much lower cost by just doing it, every single home in the subdivision right from the get-go. Another advantage of, doing like, for example, the subdivision example is that, if you only have like 4 or 5 home designs, you can have your engineering design review for each of those home designs. And even though they're cookie cutted, like 20 times each, you don't need to pay for the design reviews for each of those homes. You just pay for the 5 different plans. And so that's some other things that can help reduce some of these soft costs of solar. Next slide. And so, yeah, so we got the batteries and the solar, and the size of the battery is something to think about. But one thing you can do to also kind of reduce the size of the battery that you need to purchase, as I said before, batteries have come down a lot in price, but you're still talking, if you want a battery that will be able to cover you through a day in the winter, you're talking about $10,000, and so that's not some small change. So one of the ways you can reduce the size of the battery you need to buy is to put in some load control intelligence into the home. And there are some products out there to help you do that. Span makes some smart electrical panels that are getting smarter by the day. And so, these panels can be integrated with this solar prediction information that's available on the internet. And so you can do some load controls and therefore, for example, delay your dryer until instead of drying your clothes at 10 o'clock at night and use your battery, then the intelligent control of these devices and with the panel, you can delay drying your clothes until noon the next day. And if that's acceptable to you, then by the time noon next day, there's plenty of solar available, then great. Now you're drying your clothes on, without having to use the battery. You're literally using the energy from the panels. And so then you can reduce the size of the battery. So those are some ideas. This technology is all retail available. The number of smart appliances is growing by the day. They get smarter, seems like every week. Next slide. And so, okay, well, if we have a scenario where you're able to basically cover 80 or 90% of your energy usage from just your own battery and solar system, then what role does the electric utility play? Well, this is a very big concern to some electric utilities. And they've even coined terms like this is the utility death spiral. Where if more and more people go solar, then the electric utility eventually go bankrupt. So some utilities are very concerned about this, and I will keep trying to tell people that hey, this is not a big concern. Telephone companies did not go out of business when everybody switched to cell phones. They are still very much alive and well today. Electric utilities are the same way. They can adapt. Here's some of the ideas that I think are pretty logical paths forward for electric utilities. They become a solar and storage installation and service company. Instead of necessarily primarily selling kilowatt hours, they sell the panels and the batteries. And then it's also really important that the electric utility continues to become that energy transaction broker, that because they have the 30,000-foot view of the grid, and to see okay, well, what do we need at this very second? Do we need more generation or less demand? And they can help all the different rooftop solar systems understand this information by sending out different price signals or other types of signals to avoid a situation like the next slide. And that is this is what's currently happening in Texas and California, where there's a lot of people with solar, and they're not controlling necessarily when that solar is being fed back to the grid. A lot of this solar does not have storage, and so as a result, when it's sunny, and so therefore the generation from the panels exceeds the demand of the house, then it's just backfeeding the grid. And so it's backfeeding the grid, and as more homes come online, it backfeeds more. And so then in the noontime hours, the electric utility is wow, I basically don't need to run half of my generating resource. I can turn all that stuff off because I'm getting so much energy from all these customers' roofs. That's great, but then when the sun goes down 6 o'clock in the evening, then suddenly you don't have all that solar generation. And then when people come home, they want to turn on their stoves, they want to run the air conditioner, and then suddenly your loads are really high, but you don't have solar with storage. And so then the electric utility is scrambling to turn on enough generating resources to meet the demand. And so you get this really steep ramping around 6 p.m. And that's highly problematic, because that means that it's a very short time period. And so, you need to act quick, and electric utilities, they can only act so quick. A lot of this stuff is not automated. You usually have to pick up the phone and actually call generating units and tell them, hey, come online. And the other thing is it's very expensive, because, okay, you have to turn off all these resources at noon because all the rooftop solar is coming online, but you're still paying for the people to, be there on site to, turn the levers at 6 p.m. You have to maintain the facility. There's still fuel cost, even and all the operating maintenance stuff. And so you're not saving anything by having a lot of solar on the grid if you have to maintain all those resources for 6 p.m. Peak. And so if the electric utilities really want to save money with solar, they need to incentivize solar plus storage so that the energy generated from your rooftop solar is more flat than it is this crazy shape here. And so that's why I think that that the future of solar is solar plus storage, and that the electric utilities job is to help give you the signals to know what to do. Next slide. And so that concludes this presentation. Next, in the early January 7th, there'll be another presentation about solar beyond the roof, where we're going to talk about like solar panels as like siding, solar panels as parking lots, awnings, and whether doing solar beyond the roof makes sense, and give you a bunch of examples of where that's already done and how the price and performance of these solar beyond the roof setups have been going. So anyways, any questions? I don't see too many on the chart.
There are 2 questions in the Q&A. I'm going to really quickly, before we answer those, launch our final poll before people hop off. This is really quick and just helps us improve these presentations moving forward. While people are answering that, one of the questions was if we could share these slides with you all.
Sure.
Cool. So after this, I will post this recording to Solar Oregon's YouTube channel. So if you search Solar Oregon on YouTube, I'll post this and put in the comments or the description of the video a link to the slides. And also, if you are registered through Eventbrite, I can send out an email through there with the YouTube link and the slides link.
Curious, Grace, do we have the video for last presentation to send the post also?
I will look for that, see where that was saved.
Okay. And then the question, Pacific Power, small qualifying facilities. The answer is yes. Pacific Power has a different rate tariff. It's very similar to PGE's. You just have to look it up to find out exactly what the numbers are and maybe do some math yourself. But they're very similar to the Portland General Electric numbers. And the cool thing about small qualifying facility is that it's actually many times, let's see, maybe it was the 70s or 80s. I'm forgetting my energy policy history. But some president signed a bill basically mandating that all electric utilities accept small qualifying facilities. And so that's something that's really cool. And then the 10K for a 1-day battery storage, yes, that's without tax credits. Once you apply the tax credits, it'll be something much less than that for sure. Like you get the 30% from the Inflation Reduction Act, and then whatever portion of the Oregon solar plus storage that you can get. I believe that the solar plus storage maxes out $5,000, and I think that's total system. So then whatever fraction that is, that's battery versus solar panels. You can pencil out, break it out yourself if you wanted to.
Great. Well, I think those are all the questions, which ends us right on time at 10:59.
Oh, in the chat, there's also a peak time rebate. Carrie mentioned that is a program that Portland General Electric is doing right now. And peak time rebate is where they send you a text message, and I think they might even be able to send you like a robot phone call telling you what time in the next day you need to save energy. And so then if you are successful at saving energy, they give you a rebate for those for successfully executing that. And that's kind of a stopgap thing, because it requires user intervention, right? Like you get a text message telling you that you need to do something next day, you have to do it manually. The future is, automating this stuff where like, and we have the technology to do it already, but it's a matter of market adoption. And so, yeah, in the future, when you can automate this stuff, then it makes the job of running the grid from PG and Pacific Power's standpoint much easier. Okay, cool. Good job, Carrie, for getting 25 bucks.
I think there's something about their algorithm and the fact that I have solar panels that might be a little hiccup, but it doesn't happen every time, so I don't think it's too bad.
I see. Well, if you want, you can scroll back to the slide for the wholesale generation rate tariff for the qualifying facility slide. Where I think that in the future, if there's still a peak time rebate, is that they're going to pay you $25 at like if you can send power back to the grid in December, like the time when there's not a lot of solar. So if the grid wants to get cleaner, then they have no choice but to buy your solar energy at a premium. Versus in that slide, the summertime rates are actually really low because the electric utility has a lot of solar on their side of the meter also, and so they're not necessarily super interested in your solar in the summertime. But in the wintertime, then when everybody is at a deficit, then your value of your solar is very high. Yep. Okay. Looks like that's everything.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Well, I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of the Saturday. It looks to be quite a nice day, so maybe get out a little bit while you can. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Edward.
Yep. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.